I met Daniel 6 years ago at a career training program right after college, and honestly, he seemed like exactly what I needed at the time. He was this quiet, methodical guy who had just gotten out of some toxic relationship and was clearly looking for stability. I could tell he was the type who would be grateful to have someone like me, confident, outgoing, someone who could actually hold a conversation at parties. He wasn't the most exciting guy I'd ever dated, but he had potential. And more importantly, he seemed like husband material, the kind of guy who would stick around and build something real with me. We took things slow, which was fine, because I could see he was still healing from whatever mess his ex had put him through. Daniel's always been the careful type, analyzing every decision from 12 different angles before making a move. It used to be endearing how seriously he took everything. We'd spend hours talking about our future plans, and I genuinely believed we were building towards something amazing together. After 2 years of dating, when he finally proposed, I felt like everything was falling into place exactly how it should. Our wedding was beautiful. Claire, my best friend since childhood, was my maid of honor, and she helped me plan every detail. She'd just started making real money as a lawyer, so she was able to contribute to things that Daniel and I couldn't quite afford on our own. We moved into a bigger apartment afterward, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living the adult life I'd always imagined. Daniel had his steady job, I had mine, and we had this solid foundation that felt unshakable. Claire had been dating Marcus for a while by then, and when they got married a year after us, it seemed natural that we'd all become close friends. Marcus had inherited his father's landscaping business, and apparently the old man had built quite the empire before retiring. The four of us started doing regular double dates, and I have to admit, those early days were really fun. Marcus was everything Daniel wasn't: spontaneous, charming, the kind of guy who could command attention when he walked into a room. But I was happy with Daniel, or at least I thought I was. It started small, the way these things always do. Claire would call me excited about some surprise Marcus had planned for her, or some expensive gift he'd bought just because he was thinking of her. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. She's my oldest friend, and she deserved good things. But after a while, the calls started to grate on me. She'd go on and on about weekend trips to wine country, jewelry that cost more than Daniel made in a month, flowers delivered to her office for no reason at all. And I'd hang up the phone and look around our apartment, at Daniel sitting there in his old college t-shirt playing video games, and wonder when exactly I'd settled for so little. "Must be nice," I'd mutter after hanging up, and Daniel would look up with that confused expression he always wore when I was frustrated about something he couldn't quite understand. "What's nice?" he'd ask, and I'd just shake my head, because explaining it felt pointless. How could I tell him that watching my best friend live this fairy tale life was making me realize how ordinary ours was? How could I explain that Marcus treated Claire like a queen, while Daniel treated me like a roommate he happened to sleep with? The comparisons became impossible to ignore. When we'd go out to dinner, Marcus would order wine without looking at the prices, would insist on picking up the check, would pull out Claire's chair and compliment her dress. Daniel would study the menu for 10 minutes trying to find something affordable, would forget to tell me I looked nice, would split the check down to the penny. I started noticing how Marcus's eyes would light up when Claire walked into a room, how he'd reach for her hand without thinking about it, how he'd lean in close to whisper things that made her laugh. Claire didn't even seem to appreciate what she had. She'd complain about Marcus working too much, or about how he'd surprised her with earrings when she'd been hoping for a necklace. She had no idea what it was like to be with someone who thought romance meant remembering to put the toilet seat down. I'd listen to her nitpick her perfect life, and feel this burning resentment building in my chest. Why did she get everything while I was supposed to be grateful for scraps? I started paying more attention to Marcus during our group outings, the way he'd ask Claire about her day and actually listen to the answer, the way he'd notice when she was tired or stressed and suggest they leave early, the way he'd look at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. And slowly, I started to wonder what it would feel like to have someone look at me that way. It wasn't like I planned what happened next. At least, that's what I told myself. We were all at some barbecue at Marcus and Claire's house, and Claire had gotten called away for some work emergency. Daniel was deep in conversation with some guy about computer programming or whatever, and I found myself alone with Marcus on the back deck. He asked me if I was okay, said I seemed distracted lately, and something about the way he was looking at me, like he actually cared about the answer, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Just tired of being taken for granted, I guess," I said, and he nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. "Daniel's a lucky guy," he said quietly. "I hope he knows that." The way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on mine, just a beat too long, I knew we'd crossed some kind of line. And honestly, it felt amazing. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was seeing me as more than just a convenience, more than just the woman who happened to be there. We started texting after that. Nothing inappropriate at first, just friendly conversations that gradually became more personal. Marcus would ask about my day, remember things I'd mentioned in passing, make me laugh with observations about people we both knew. He made me feel interesting again, made me remember who I used to be before I became Daniel's boring wife. The first time we met for coffee, I told myself it was innocent. Just friends talking. But the way Marcus looked at me across the table, the way he listened to everything I said like it mattered, the way he reached across to touch my hand when I was telling him about some frustration at work, I knew we were heading somewhere Daniel would never forgive. But you know what? I was tired of living my life according to what Daniel would or wouldn't forgive. Claire had everything handed to her since we were kids, and now she had Marcus too, and she didn't even appreciate him. She took his attention for granted, rolled her eyes at his romantic gestures, complained about having too many nice things. Meanwhile, I was starving for even a fraction of what she casually dismissed. Maybe it was time I took what I deserved for once. The affair started 3 months later, and I'm not going to pretend I felt guilty about it. Marcus made me feel alive again, made me remember what it was like to be desired instead of just tolerated. When he looked at me, I could see myself the way I used to be, confident, attractive, worth pursuing. With Daniel, I'd become invisible, just another piece of furniture in our bland little life. I started buying new clothes, paying more attention to my appearance, feeling better about myself than I had in years. Daniel noticed the changes, but not in the way I'd hoped he would. Instead of seeing that his wife was becoming more confident and attractive, he just seemed confused by the effort I was putting in. He'd make awkward comments about my new outfits or ask why I was wearing makeup to run errands, like he couldn't fathom that I might want to look good for reasons that had nothing to do with him. The physical distance between Daniel and me grew naturally. How could I pretend to be interested in his fumbling attempts at intimacy when I knew what real passion felt like? How could I listen to his boring stories about work when Marcus and I had actual conversations about real things? I started staying late at the office, claiming I had extra projects, when really, I was meeting Marcus at hotels or his office after hours. The lies came easily because the truth was so much better than the life I was supposed to be living. For months, I felt like I was finally getting what I deserved. Marcus would tell me I was beautiful, would plan elaborate afternoons together, would make me feel like the center of his universe in ways Daniel never had. I convinced myself that Claire didn't deserve him, that she'd probably be happier with someone more boring anyway. Someone who wouldn't make her feel obligated to be grateful for romantic gestures she clearly didn't want. I got careless, I'll admit that. When you're finally living the life you should have had all along, it's hard to remember to hide it. I stopped being as careful about covering my tracks, stopped worrying so much about whether Daniel might notice my new confidence or my unexplained absences. I felt untouchable, like I'd finally figured out how to get what I wanted, while everyone else was still playing by rules that only benefited people like Claire. That's why it was such a shock when Daniel came home 2 weeks ago with that look on his face. You know the one. That cold, methodical expression he gets when he's been thinking about something for too long. He sat me down at our kitchen table and pulled out an envelope, like he was presenting evidence in court. "I know about Marcus," he said, and my whole world tilted sideways. The photos were damning, I'll give him that. Someone had clearly been following us, taking pictures of us going into hotels, kissing in parking lots, holding hands at restaurants across town. Professional quality stuff, the kind of evidence that doesn't leave room for interpretation. But instead of panicking, I felt this surge of anger. How dare he have me followed like some kind of criminal? How dare he invade my privacy instead of looking at his own failures as a husband? "This is insane," I told him, flipping through the photos like they were some kind of joke. "You actually believe I could betray my best friend? Someone is obviously trying to frame me up, Daniel. Can't you see that?" He just sat there staring at me with those disappointed eyes, like I was some stranger he'd never seen before. "Courtney, the evidence is right there. I can see your face clearly in every single photo." "Evidence can be faked," I shot back. "Anyone with decent photo editing software could make these. I can't believe you're so quick to think the worst of me instead of protecting your wife from whoever's trying to destroy our marriage." But Daniel had already made up his mind. He'd spent a week investigating, he said, a week watching me lie to his face while he gathered proof of what I was doing. He packed a bag and said he'd be staying at a hotel while he figured out what came next, like I was some kind of threat he needed to protect himself from. After he left, I realized Claire must have put him up to this. She'd probably figured out what was happening with Marcus and decided to destroy my life rather than admit she couldn't keep her husband satisfied. That's exactly the kind of manipulative thing she'd do, play the victim while orchestrating everyone else's downfall. I drove to her house the next day to confront her about it, to tell her exactly what I thought of her little scheme. She answered the door looking all innocent and surprised, like she hadn't just blown up my entire life. "How could you do this to me?" I demanded, pushing past her into her perfect living room with its expensive furniture and fresh flowers. "How could you turn my own husband against me?" "Courtney, what are you talking about?" she said, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. "Don't play dumb with me, Claire. I know you're behind those photos. I know you hired someone to follow me around and make me look bad because you can't handle the fact that Marcus actually cares about someone else for once." That's when she got that self-righteous look on her face, the same expression she'd worn since we were kids, whenever she thought she was better than me. "Marcus told me everything, Courtney. He told me about the affair. How could you do this to us? I thought you were my friend." "Friend?" I laughed, because the hypocrisy was just too much. "You've never been my friend, Claire. Friends don't spend every conversation rubbing their perfect lives in each other's faces. Friends don't act like they deserve everything good that happens to them, while everyone else should be grateful for leftovers." "That's not fair," she started to say, but I was done listening to her fake concern. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? You've had everything handed to you since we were kids. The perfect grades, the law degree your parents paid for, the successful husband who treats you like a queen. And you don't even appreciate any of it. You complain about Marcus working too much, you nitpick his gifts, you take all of his attention for granted while I'm married to someone who barely remembers I exist." The words were pouring out of me now, years of resentment finally finding their target. "I have been wanting to put you in your place for a very long time, Claire. You walk around acting like you're better than everyone else, like you deserve all the good things in life, while the rest of us should be thankful for scraps. Well, maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to lose something for once." She was backing away from me, looking scared, which only made me angrier. Even now, she was acting like the victim, like I was the unreasonable one. "You ruined my marriage," I told her, following her toward the kitchen. "You turned Daniel against me because you couldn't handle the fact that your precious husband actually found someone who appreciates him." "Courtney, please calm down," she said, reaching for her phone. "You're scaring me." "I'm scaring you? You destroy my entire life, and then you're scared of me?" Something snapped inside me then. All those years of watching her get everything while I got nothing. All those phone calls where she bragged about her perfect life, All those double dates where I had to pretend I was happy with my boring husband while she got to be with someone who actually knew how to treat a woman right. I grabbed the phone out of her hands and threw it across the room, watched it shatter against her expensive tile backsplash. The sound was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. "You don't get to call for help," I told her. "You don't get to play victim when you're the one who started this whole thing." What happened next was a blur of anger and frustration and years of suppressed resentment finally finding an outlet. I'd spent so long being the good friend, the supportive wife, the woman who smiled and nodded while everyone else got what they wanted. But Claire had pushed too far this time, had taken away the one good thing I'd managed to find for myself. When I finally left her house, she was on the floor crying, surrounded by broken dishes and overturned furniture. Her perfect living room didn't look so perfect anymore, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd actually accomplished something meaningful. Of course, she pressed charges. Of course, she made me out to be some kind of monster instead of acknowledging her own role in what had happened. The court case was a joke. Claire, with her law degree and her expensive attorney, painting herself as an innocent victim, while I sat there trying to explain how she'd systematically destroyed my life and my marriage. The judge ordered me to pay for her medical bills and the property damage like I was some common criminal instead of a woman who'd finally stood up for herself. Claire sat in that courtroom looking all fragile and wounded, milking the sympathy for everything it was worth. Meanwhile, Daniel served me with divorce papers. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of supporting him through his boring career and his social anxiety and his complete inability to be a real husband, and this is how he repaid me. He threw my belongings out on the lawn like I was trash, changed the locks, and refused to take my calls. Marcus was no better. The second everything came out into the open, he dropped me like I meant nothing to him. All those months of telling me I was special, that I deserved better, that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. Apparently, none of that mattered when his comfortable life was threatened. He crawled back to Claire, begging for forgiveness, leaving me with nothing. Even my own mother turned against me. When she found out what had happened, she told me I'd brought shame on our family, and that she needed time to figure out if she could even look at me the same way. My own mother, choosing to believe their version of events, instead of supporting her daughter through the worst period of her life. I tried calling Daniel's brother Ryan, hoping maybe he could talk some sense into Daniel. Help him see that he was throwing away our marriage over a misunderstanding. But Ryan just told me to leave his family alone and blocked my number, like I was some kind of stalker instead of someone trying to save her marriage. The worst part was how everyone acted like I was the villain in this story. Daniel started spending time with Claire, probably bonding over their shared victim status, probably telling each other how lucky they were to be rid of terrible me. I'd call him at work, trying to explain my side of things, trying to make him understand that I never meant for any of this to happen, but he'd just hang up on me. "You're the worst husband I've ever heard of," I finally told him during one of our last conversations. What kind of man abandons his wife when she needs him most? What kind of person throws away 6 years of marriage without even trying to work things out? But Daniel had already made up his mind. He'd probably been looking for an excuse to get rid of me for years, and this whole situation just gave him the perfect opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd been cheating on me with Claire this whole time, if this entire thing was just their way of getting me out of the picture so they could be together. When I went to his house yesterday, our house, the home we'd built together, to try one more time to make him see reason, he called the police on me. The police, like I was some kind of criminal instead of a woman trying to save her marriage. They arrested me for disturbing the peace, spent the night in jail like a common criminal, all because I refused to give up on the life Daniel and I were supposed to have together. Now I'm sitting in this cheap motel room, officially divorced, officially alone, trying to figure out how everything went so wrong so fast. Daniel gets to move on with his life, probably with Claire, while I'm left with nothing. Claire gets her perfect life back, plus the satisfaction of knowing she destroyed mine. Marcus gets forgiven for his part in all of this, while I'm painted as the seductress who ruined everything. Everyone gets to move on, except me. Everyone gets to be the victim except the person who actually lost everything. I gave Daniel the best years of my life, supported Claire through every triumph and disappointment, and this is what I get in return: abandoned, betrayed, and blamed for having the audacity to want more than the scraps everyone else thought I should be grateful for. But I know the truth, even if no one else wants to acknowledge it. I know that Claire couldn't handle sharing Marcus's attention, that Daniel was looking for an excuse to end our marriage, that everyone involved in this situation is just as guilty as I am. The only difference is that they get to walk away clean, while I'm left holding all the blame. Maybe someday they'll realize what they lost. Maybe someday they'll understand that I was just trying to find the happiness that everyone else seemed to take for granted. But by then, it'll be too late to fix what they broke. Too late to undo the damage they caused when they decided I was expendable. At least I know I fought for what I wanted, instead of settling for a life that made me miserable. At least I know I didn't just accept being ignored and undervalued and taken for granted. That has to count for something, even if I'm the only one who sees it that way.